What is machine learning? Machine learning is the process of automatically learning and deriving insights from data that can drive business value. Now, it has become more and more easy to collect a lot of data. And now, because of this, businesses are looking at ML as the next thing to drive their business value, to move the needle, right? So this means that there's a huge demand for ML related roles, but there aren't enough people to fill these roles. So why is there a gap? The skill gap is because what the industry demands is experts who can actually tackle a problem end to end, who can take a business requirement and come up with a formulation of the right model and execute it. But what is available right now in the market is people who have recently graduated or people who do not have a lot of experience handling live machine learning projects, who have not actually executed a project end to end. Right? So another gap that exists is the fact that machine learning is an amalgamation of being able to build statistical or mathematical models and being able to execute them through programming skills. And it's important to find people who are adept at both these. And that's another thing that the industry is looking for. So now let's look at the various job roles that are out there in the scope of machine learning and data science. So first, let us talk about the machine learning scientist role. And this is the role that I had at most of the places that I worked at. So a machine learning scientist is someone who is expected to understand various kinds of machine learning models and the underlying statistics. For instance, they would be adept at probabilistic programming, statistics, and the fundamentals like linear algebra and optimization and so on. And deep learning. They would know about various toolkits available, for instance, like scikit-learn, or they would understand frameworks such as Keras and TensorFlow, for instance, and should be able to take up a project and formulate the right model for the particular problem at hand and be able to execute it. Many a time it's useful for them to know big data frameworks and be able to execute algorithms at scale. For instance, we used a lot of Spark at Amazon, right? So that's typically a machine learning scientist, and sometimes they're called data scientists. So again, as we all know, the job titles, are representative, and we want to talk about the most popular definition of them. So the next role that I'm going to talk about is the machine learning engineer. Now, the machine learning engineer also has a good understanding of popular machine learning tools that are used to solve problems, and is someone who can make a machine learning pipeline end to end using various libraries, again, like, the scikit-learn, or, if you can use deep learning libraries for training, again, like Keras, TensorFlow, and so on. Someone who can build the end-to-end pipeline and deploy it and write maintainable code, right? So that's a machine learning engineer. Another popular role is the data analyst. The data analyst is someone who is not usually directly working with deployable production code, but is working on problems of decision support by looking at data and making inferences. The kind of tools that they typically use could be, it could vary from, just SQL to understand, make inferences from database, all the data that exists in database, to tools like Excel and Tableau. But often they also know a little bit of, they use predictive modeling, that's machine learning. And people tend to use Python, and also R is very popular with data analysts. Data analysts are someone who are really good at skills such as data visualization and data storytelling, right? And are someone who can gather insights from data. Another role that we talk about today is the data engineer. The data engineer is someone who handles the data, which means the data engineer works on figuring out what goes into the ML algorithm or the model and what comes out of the ML model and how to handle that. So the data that an ML model uses resides in various sources. And the data engineer's job is to collect all these data from various sources and clean this data and process this data, do ETL on it, and give it in the appropriate format to the ML algorithm. Right? That's building the data pipeline is what it's called. And then take the data out of the ML algorithm and do the right thing with it so that it can be consumed by the rest of the application. So typically, data engineers tend to be good programmers. They could use Python, or sometimes they even use Java, C++. It depends on what they write the Python with. They are often good with big data technologies because they build this data pipeline, and often it is very large scale data. So they are good with Hive and Hadoop and all the big data platforms typically, right? So that's a data engineer, someone who handles data. The last role I'm going to talk about is a machine learning manager. And I'm going to talk about this role because this might be more appropriate for some of you who are listening, more aligned with what you've already done. The machine learning manager role is mostly there in companies which have like a few different data scientists or data engineers and has a data science team. The machine learning manager need not know all the ML tools hands-on. It's not expected that he go and code all these with these tools, but is someone who understands the basic ML concepts so that they can understand what makes sense and what does not, what works and what does not, and is able to work with data scientists and also the business team to formulate a data science roadmap and see that it's executed in a meaningful fashion. Right? So these are some popular roles, and there are of course many others. Okay, now that we have talked about the various roles available in the scope of machine learning, let's see how to transition to one of these roles. The first thing I would talk about transitioning is, more often than not, it is best to leverage the skills that you have when you try to transition to a new field. So for instance, if you're a good programmer, it's best to leverage these skills and move to a role where you can leverage a lot of your programming skills. For example, if you're a hardcore developer, maybe a machine learning engineer is a good place to transition to, right? Similarly, if you have a lot of statistics background already, you might want to learn some programming, and the idea is to find what complements your existing skills to make you shine in your new role, right? That said, I think another thing that I would like to add about transitioning is that there are a lot of opportunities available now to learn data science or machine learning in a very structured way, right? So what this involves is, number one, you need to get a good handle of the fundamental mathematical concepts and the statistics. This is mandatory. The second part is to be able to work on real world problems. And it's how much ever I emphasize on this, it's not enough, because it's really important to work on some real data and real world problems in order to get a feel for it and get some hands-on experience. The third is to be able to talk to people who actually executed real world problems in order to get a good sense of what works and what does not, right? And I think with all the resources available right now, it should definitely be possible to transition to a career in machine learning. So I love data science, I love machine learning, and I want to talk about one of the applications that I personally worked on that I like a lot. A problem that I often face, I'm a very avid shopper, and I worked at Amazon for a long time, and I love Amazon. So I shop for everything on Amazon. But when it comes to apparel, I find it really hard to pick my size online, right? And going to offline stores still wins there. So what I worked on at Amazon, and sort of I grabbed the opportunity to work on it when that came up, was recommending size when you purchase something online. So there is it's very hard to pick the size online because there are so many different brands, and each brand has like a different sizing convention, and sometimes the sizing data is just missing. So how does one go about picking the right size and if you pick the wrong size, it's like a really bad experience. You have to return it. Sometimes you don't even return it and end up wearing the wrong size. So I worked on building models to look at customer purchase data, previous purchases, and what the customer returned. For example, if you returned something saying that it's large, then your size is probably smaller than the size that you purchased there, right? Suppose you returned saying it is small, your size is probably larger than that size, right? So including these cues from many customers came up with a custom machine learning algorithm to actually predict the size of predict your size for a particular brand, right? So that's something I worked on, and we even published this at www. So that was a very exciting project. So talking about transitioning to data science, let me also tell you my own story. So while I did masters in statistics and computer graphics, I was a developer before I became a machine learning scientist. So I was a developer, but I wanted to transition. And at that time, like over 10 years back, when I tried to transition, there weren't a lot of resources like there are today. There wasn't even Coursera, for instance. And the path that I chose to transition to machine learning was to actually do a PhD because I wanted to dig deeper into the subject. But today there are so many various structured courses available that it's very easy for someone to actually pick up one of them even while you're at your job. But that said, one thing I want to add here is that while I worked as a scientist at Amazon, for instance, I have interviewed a lot of people who actually went through some of the online courses. And what I also find is that sometimes they actually lack the depth. For instance, people are able to talk about how they executed a particular problem using, let's say, a deep learning library. But when I ask them even simple fundamentals, questions on fundamentals, they're not able to answer it. And that's because it's very important to actually pick a course that actually gives you both the depth and also live hands-on projects. So it's all about picking the right course, but there are a lot of courses out there and there is a lot of content out there. So to sum it up, the only thing that's constant is change. Tech is evolving very rapidly, and we all need to upgrade ourselves and keep ourselves up to date. And the good thing is there are many avenues to do that. Learning ML skills especially, there are many resources to do that, right? I want to conclude by summarizing some of the things that I've said. So we looked at various kinds of job roles related to machine learning. I want to sort of emphasize on one of the things I said earlier, that when you pick one of these roles, it's and when you upgrade yourself, like we just talked about, it's very important to pick the right role that helps you leverage the skills that you already have.